The Words of MLK Jr.
It is often said, actions speak louder than words. Some figures in history show us that our words can be very powerful, and a rare few had both bold words and actions that inspired and continue to inspire hope and social change. Martin Luther King Jr. is a very important person in American history because he used his words to show that, no matter our skin's color, we are all the same. He traveled the United States preaching about civil rights and made great strides in breaking down racial barriers. Through his actions, yes, but it's his words that history remembers most clearly. It is not always easy to sway a nation of people and to turn them onto a path that promotes equality and fairness in the eyes of the law, but King was a natural speaker and a determined man. He did not back down from the challenge of leading marginalized and mistreated blacks in America. He marched on despite the challenges, and he made sure the country heard his words. What was special about the way King inspired change was that he used speeches and his poetic, powerful words instead of violence in order to convince people of his views. He sought to change the American institution of separate but equal, where blacks and whites went to different schools, were often prohibited from marrying, and where public pools, restrooms, and even businesses kept blacks from enjoying the same higher quality and treatment as whites. He believed in non-violent protesting, instead choosing to communicate verbally, intellectually, and emotionally with people to help them understand what is universally important: equal treatment, no matter the color of one's skin. He implored people to speak and listen to one another rather than fight, and with persistent effort over many years, he was able to turn some of his dream into a reality. There were many trials facing him on the journey to equality. He would face hatred, confusion, and even jail before seeing real change take hold in the country. But he never gave up. King made life better for millions of people, with words being his primary tool. King was born in the marshy city of Atlanta, Georgia, in 1929. He grew up comfortably in the suburbs. Both his father and his grandfather were preachers, a profession that focuses on speaking powerfully. From the men in his life, King learned to use his words to affect people. Though he did not have financial struggles growing up, his youth was not without challenges. When King was 6 years old, a white friend of his said they were no longer allowed to play together because they were now going to different schools, ones separated by race. This was part of the separate but equal law of America. Many schools in the United States separated students into schools based on the color of their skin, with whites often educated in higher quality schools than blacks enjoyed. This made King upset, even as a child. Unfortunately, it would not be the first time that someone would treat him differently from others because he was black. Events like these would set the stage for King to make great change in the world. When he was 15 years old, King began attending Morehouse College. He began studying sciences and medicine, but after a while, his interest grew in the church, and he began to study religion. His father was very proud, as it seemed King would carry on the tradition of his father and grandfather's profession. 3 years later, King moved to Pennsylvania to continue studying religion. At school, he developed a reputation as an amazing speaker and an inspiration to his peers. He was elected president of the student body, even though he went to a mostly white school. Even from his younger years, King was able to reach out and connect to people, even those different from him. He was commended by his teachers for being an excellent and model student, holding true to all the virtues he believed in. While he was in Pennsylvania, King discovered the works of Mohandas Gandhi, a man from India that used nonviolent protest to help earn India its independence from British rule. Gandhi wrote about the importance of nonviolent protests. This would become a very important part of King's decision to challenge racism in the United States. King led a movement that involved protests and sit-ins where people sat silently in a public place, such as a business, until they were removed by the police, or their views were aired and heard by communities and people in power. All of these acts were done without any violence and were meant to draw attention to the issues facing blacks in America at the time. It proved a very effective tactic. In 1953, King, along with his new wife, moved to Montgomery, Alabama, where he became the pastor of a local church. In Alabama, black people had to sit in the back of public buses, while white people got to sit in front. In 1955, a young woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus to a white person, even though it was the law. This was the start of a movement called the Montgomery Bus Boycott. King became the leader. He was the right person for the job. He was young, he was new in town, and everyone respected him. The Montgomery Bus Boycott lasted for over a year, and many citizens of Montgomery became angry with King. However, the boycott efforts were rewarded when, in 1956, the buses in Montgomery, Alabama were no longer segregated. Black people were finally able to sit where they wanted on buses. King proved himself a strong and intelligent leader at only 27 years old. Using the boycott as a starting point, King began his movement in earnest. In order to create a united front along the American South, he founded the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or the SCLC. It was then that King moved back to Atlanta, eager to bring change to his hometown. He attended protests and sit-ins all over the South, pushing for change and inspiring others. He traveled all around the country, spreading his words and his ideas. He traveled abroad to strengthen his message, even visiting India to tour what King called the land of Gandhi, although he wasn't able to meet the man himself. Sadly, Gandhi had died several years before King's own rise as a non-violent activist. However, Indians welcomed King with open arms. And as King's worldwide renown grew, his movement took firm hold all across the United States. As the movement started to pick up speed, it was met with resistance. In 1963, King was in Birmingham, Alabama, trying to draw attention to the racially discriminatory practice of barring blacks from using whites' lunch counters. There, the police arrested King and almost all of his fellow protesters. While he was in jail, King wrote a letter to the American people. It explained why, even though he believed in nonviolent action, he believed that direct action was needed. Just talking about things would not solve problems. And so he advocated protests and sit-ins, saying they were the only way to get people's attention, the only way to inspire and instill lasting change. Eventually, King was released from jail. By then, his message had spread farther across the country. He was starting to gain even more momentum. Later that very year, one of the most important events in United States civil rights history took place. Over 200,000 people came to Washington, D.C., and gathered in front of the Lincoln Memorial. They demanded all people be treated equally regardless of the color of their skin. It was there that King delivered his most famous speech, "I Have a Dream." King shared his belief that someday all would be viewed as equal, treated equally under the law, and that people of all skin colors would be united. His speech is still popular today and quoted often. It is viewed as one of the most powerful and moving speeches in American history. The rally was the final push that the civil rights movement needed to bring an end to lawful racial discrimination in the country. After an outpouring of national support, the United States passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964. It made it illegal under the law to prevent blacks from using white facilities, such as schools and even drinking fountains. People were united under the law. King was recognized that same year with the Nobel Peace Prize. In his acceptance speech, he told the world that he refused to believe any part of humanity is naturally bad and that anyone is capable of change. After the Civil Rights Act, King received some negative criticism for his continued methods of nonviolent protest. Some blacks and whites believed that aggressive action was needed to bring about actual change in the world, and they felt the Civil Rights Act simply hadn't done enough to truly combat discrimination. Malcolm X, another civil rights leader, called the methods used by King criminal.